Hey everyone, it's Joelle at Brooklyn Book Doctor, and I am so excited to be here today with Tanya Geisler, who's in Toronto. Tanya is a leadership coach. She works to help women become leaders with impeccable impact. She is a TEDx speaker and an all-around rock star, helping you or us become rock stars. And she is here today to talk with us about perfectionism and procrastination, which is the theme of this series that I'm doing in June, talking to a whole bunch of different people about this issue that tends to come up for people who are writing books, who have really sat down and said, I'm going to engage with my passion project. And suddenly, wow, I'm cleaning the house, I'm making phone calls, I'm gardening suddenly. I thought I was using this hour to write. So I'm here with Tanya. We're going to talk about this issue from her perspective, and she really specializes in coaching people through this thing called the imposter complex. So I thought, Tanya, maybe we'd start with just telling us what the imposter complex is.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me. What a great idea. What a great analysis. What a great offering. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, of course. So the imposter complex, I always start with a history lesson, is, let me back up. It's actually the imposter phenomenon, and that was the term coined by clinical psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes back in '78. So they were working with high-functioning, high-achieving women, academics at Oberlin College, and they noticed this through line of all of these women's experience. Didn't matter how successful they were, didn't matter how many data sets they had to prove to their, to point to their success. They would always chalk their success up to luck, fluke, timing, or having somehow managed to deceive people into thinking they were smarter, more capable than they actually are. They were more than able to internalize their failures, though, or at least their perceived failures. So that's really where it sort of begins. So it's this idea that it doesn't matter how successful, it doesn't matter how well you did that first time, it was just a fluke, it was just luck, they were just being nice, right? The critiques that you're getting that are lovely and the praise cannot be trusted, they're just being nice, right? That's all of that is wrapped up in the imposter complex. So I've got lots more to say. In fact, a book, to be certain.
Of course, yes.
Ding, 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 yeah.
I would think so.
But it really is trying to keep us out of action, doubting our capacity, and alone and isolated. So that's it's three main objectives. I call it a complex. You've heard it called the imposter syndrome. That's far more popular in use. My SEO people get super pissed that I won't use it, but I won't, because it's not an actual syndrome. It's not a clinical diagnosis. So I call it a complex, and that's just what it is. So obviously I have lots more to say, but that's really sort of the overarching theme. It's also part of our tribal need to belong. And I think that's a really important, I think it's really important that we understand that. And then I guess the final thing that I'll just say in the sort of like the imposter complex 101 perspective is that it has 12 very specific lies, and it has its hideout in 6 very specific behavioral traits. And that's where our conversation starts to get really looped in. But I also want to acknowledge that people that experience this are, by definition, have strong values of mastery, integrity, and excellence. So if you're experiencing it, it's because you have those values. That's a good thing.
That's a very good thing. And that's the upside to this is that procrastination in particular, I know it has a creative function. So it's not always going to be something that undercuts you, but it can derail your project if every time you sit down, you don't get anywhere. And so there's a feeling, well, I didn't do it. So, then you're loading on judgment. But sometimes I have clients who need to stew, and then suddenly everything comes out.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
So there is that productive part of it.
Absolutely.
But I love this idea that these behaviors that maybe don't serve us are actually a sign of values. That's fascinating. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. So, because it sucks to feel like the imposter, right? We go to certain behaviors to avoid feeling like that. So those are, and Clance and Imes identified 4, and have expanded to include 6. So there is good old-fashioned people pleasing. So that's where we want to make sure that everybody likes us. There are leaky boundaries that make sure that everybody feels like, that we're part of a thing and there's no separation between them and us. There's diminishment where we want to dim our light. There's comparison where we want to perpetually see how we're stacking up to others. There's perfectionism, and there's procrastination. And so all of these particular behaviors, here's the really fascinating thing, and this is why I have a book upon a book in here. These are all actually double binds. So we go to this behavior to avoid feeling like the imposter, but by engaging in this behavior, we actually end up feeling more like the imposter. So take people pleasing, for instance. We're going to make sure that everybody likes us. We're going to use our likability and our charm. But then when we're invited to write the book, do the pitch, get up and speak, we are going to chalk it up to the fact that they just like us or they're just being nice, not because we are deeply skilled and talented in this particular realm. Mm-hmm. So that has us feeling more like the imposter. Mm-hmm. And each one of these behaviors I can track back to the same way. And so, I'm sure we'll go into perfectionism and procrastination in the same way, but just know that that's what happens with comparison. We're looking to see how we're stacking up to everybody, but, our sweet human brains, we're always going to be comparing everybody's, highlight reel to our own be reel. So it's not, we actually can't be trusted with what we're looking at, right? So we're never going to stack up because that's how confirmation bias works. Which is also part and parcel of what these behavioral traits are really about. They're really about looking for ways to prove to ourselves that we are the imposter.
Right. So if you're writing a book, but you secretly feel like you can never be an author, then you could sit at your desk for 6 hours. I don't know anyone who actually has 6 hours to sit at their desk and write their book, but say, I'm just using an extreme example, and you wrote one paragraph in that 6 hour time span. That's a form of perfectionism. And in a way, what you're doing is showing to yourself that you don't have it in you to even complete a page in this time that you've given to yourself or somehow you've earned. And so you're never going to get to the finish line or
perfect. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And that could work, that could also be comparison. So, with perfectionism, it's really linked to this diligence, right? You're going to work 2 to 3 times as hard as anybody else, but then you look up and you go, wait a minute, why do I have to work 2 to 3 times as hard as everybody else? Clearly, I'm not supposed to be here. Clearly, I'm not the expert. Clearly, I'm not supposed to call myself an author, right? All of that will show up. And that's sort of like, in that example, it tips over a little bit into comparison, same thing, where we're constantly looking to see how we're stacking up, but we're not really looking, fundamentally, we're looking to see how we aren't stacking up more than anything else when we are in that more depleted kind of under-resourced place, which is usually when we're going to see what other people are doing, right? Let's face it.
It seems like it bleeds right over into that, both perfectionism and procrastination. They're in a way forms of avoidance or hiding so that we don't have to face either other people's comparison or ourselves, something deep in ourselves, either success or failure.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes. And that success or failure, because if you are like way out in front or way behind, you're not part of that pack. And because we're so obsessed with being part of the pack, we don't want to be othered for there or there. We will feel that massive sense of disconnection. And I think fundamentally that's what's underneath everything. When I do deep work with clients, really that is the root of most people's fear, is a fear of disconnection. So so wild success, raging failure. And of course, that's the other thing too, right? The imposter complex is obsessed with those binaries. There's nothing in between.
There's no
It's like all or nothing. That's it. Success, failure. That's it.
I love this idea that by becoming an author, we take ourselves out of our own pack, that could set us apart, that we could be saying like, well, I've left you behind, or you've left me behind, because now I've shown that I'm different from you. Right. I have some more public space that I didn't have before.
Right. So it's like we want to just be like just a little bit ahead, but not too far. Right? So we can't imagine wild success. We can imagine like little bits of leadership. It's hard to imagine what that wild success would be like.
Mm. Is this more for women than men, or do you see it in both?
So I've been doing this for a lot of years, and I'm still never quite sure how to answer that because there's no one, all doors will lead to the same place. So let me just pick a door. That's the door I'll go in. Okay. So because the research started with those women at Oberlin College, it became kind of a gendered conversation from that perspective. And then Sheryl Sandberg with Lean In, and then Valerie Young with Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, it really directed it towards a woman's conversation. So there's a couple, there's sort of like two side points here. One is that men with strong values of mastery, integrity, and excellence absolutely will experience it. And those who have been raised in pretty typical masculine environments will not prefer, I'm not sure that's the way I want to say that, but, or will not have the same conditioning that people who've been raised as a woman have been. So the people pleasing, the perfectionism, the leaky boundaries, those I'd say are quite hyper feminine conditioning. And Joe Casey is somebody that I always refer to when I mentioned the words feminine conditioning. So those behaviors will be that much more exacerbated, though certainly men compare and are perfectionists and procrastinators, but the people pleasing has been dialed down. The comparison has been dialed down in that it's less about the hero worship and more about kind of conscious critique. So I've got lots more to say about that as well. But the what I do think it's really important to say and to acknowledge is that, you know, the further we are from the center of the universe, right? And with his permission, I say the center of the universe is my husband, Greg, who is a white, able-bodied, neurotypical, cishet dude living in North America, right? He's pretty much the center of our, North American universe. So for every concentric circle, we are othered from him by race, class, gender, ability, neurotypicality. We are going to feel an exacerbated sense of the imposter complex. So layer on a couple of intersections and you've got it by a couple folds. So really it comes down to, who are you seeing at the front of the room? How distant do you feel from that person that you are seeing most represented? And the less you identify with that person and how they present and how they represent, you're going to feel it that much more.
So you get to add that on, this cultural context barrier, to whatever doubts you might have in yourself about your ideas in themselves, about your writing in itself, about the value you're bringing in itself. And that just makes it that much more challenging.
Yeah, good times, right?
Good times.
Good times. And then the other thing, it's really, really, really important to say that you're experiencing it because you're at the precipice of expansion and because this really matters. Like, so, we don't experience the imposter complex in all aspects of our life. We'd legit never get out of bed. We don't experience perfectionism in all aspects of our life. We don't experience procrastination or diminishment or in all aspects of our life. Just the places that are really deeply important to us. So, I mean, it sounds like a good news, bad news situation, but like, I've got a yoga practice. I have zero desire to be masterful in that. We did that piece of art. I have zero desire to be masterful in that, right? I enjoy that, but where I need to be masterful is in my writing, in my coaching, in my parenting, and my leadership. So those are the places it's going to show up.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. I mean, that is what I see 100% in my clients. Mm-hmm. It's when they commit to it that then these bugaboos come up, and maybe they haven't had them before, and they're just, right? They're just, or they've been minor or dialed down in other areas of their lives. But when it comes to the book stuff, suddenly it's full volume, and the immediate response can be, well, I'm just not cut out to do this, rather than like, okay, let's back up a second and look at the behavior. I'm curious how you do that with your clients when you're seeing someone like, let's just take procrastination, because it's a really common one. So if you have a client who's really procrastinating on something, and that's a behavior, and I think you said it's a double bind. Mm-hmm. All of these are parts of double binds. Mm-hmm. How do you break it down for them, or how do you lead them to discover what is positive and useful about that procrastination and what is not working in that procrastination?
Such a great question. You stuck it. It's very good. I want to say one thing, that there are these 12 really specific lies, and what you named before is lie number 2. Wait, maybe it's lie number 1. Self-doubt is proof of your inadequacy, right? So when folks are showing up and they're starting to write their book and they go, wait a minute, like I've never had this before. I really am going to prioritize this feeling of self-doubt. It must be true. Actually, your self-doubt is proof of your humanity. So that's like, just like, let's just dial that way down. And all it's saying is that this is actually really deeply important to you and that this matters. So jazz hands, huzzah, you found a thing that matters. Yes. So procrastination is it's kind of a doozy. So perfectionism is a little bit easier in that, if the imposter complex means to keep us out of action, doubting our capacity, and alone and isolated, it's actually really easy to say, and I get very fed up in the self-development space where we're constantly like, stop your procrastination, stop your people pleasing. Like, to your point earlier, there's a value here. There is something of intrinsic importance. And so your value, if you're a perfectionist, that's your value of excellence speaking. And as you said, procrastination can be I'm not sure the words used exactly, but like basically it's a helpful process or a helpful tool or something about that.
It's generative, it's creative.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, for myself, I think that there's a strong value of discernment that can show up. So there's certainly no one size fits all. We would certainly love that if there was. So what I have people do is to really break down the pattern. I'm going to pause here for a second and say, the same is true for all of the other behavioral traits. So, diminishment might have everything to do with your value of humility. So it's hard for you to be self-promotional because you've got the strong value of humility. We love that about you. That's great. People pleasing might have everything to do with your value of inclusivity and also safety. If you've been oppressed and marginalized, being a part of the dominant culture is actually kind of an important tool of survival. Leaky boundaries might have everything to do with your generosity. And comparison has a lot to do with connection. So I just like to name those because, again, in the self-development space, we can be a little like, dumbass, stop comparing.
Right.
So what do I want to say about that? Okay, so particularly with procrastination, actually with all of these traits, I do have a quiz on my site that will help you land the plane on which one is most up for you. But if you're paying attention to this, then procrastination and perfectionism are up. So I'll have you do write out your pattern. And like, you are the world-class expert on your pattern, right? Like, you could do a TED talk on your pattern. You can go from like 10 easy steps to go from inspiration to like depletion, or, like lying under the duvet for the next 7 days. Like, only you know what that pattern is. And so I really have people write that out. Like, you get this idea, or you're really inspired to get to the page, and then what happens? 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 And we'll see a lot of these behaviors start showing up. And this is, again, why now in my mind I've got 3 books. But this is why this is endlessly fascinating, because these behavioral traits do tag team off of each other. You mentioned before we started recording that perfectionism and procrastination are inextricably linked, or two sides of the same bird.
Two wings of the same bird, two sides of the same coin.
I love nothing more than mixing my metaphors. I'm not gonna lie. So 2 wings of the same bird, and that's, I think they all can play off of each other and ping pong off of each other. So the moment we seem to get a handle on this behavioral trait, perfectionism shows that. And the moment, like, I'll actually give you an example. I'm in the middle of writing a really tricky post about anti-racism right now. So I want to get a perfect, right? I want to get a perfect, which is so much to say about that from the whole white supremacist perspective on perfectionism. But also, I want to get the gold stars. I want to get the gold stars. And then I went and I got some feedback on it. Due diligence, great. That's an important thing. But then it started to tip into people pleasing, because one of my reviewers didn't quite get it, and then I thought something and I wanted to then appease them, and it started to take into a direction that actually wasn't in integrity, because it wasn't mine anymore. So there, my boundaries started to be a little bit leaky, right? This is after a very long bout of procrastination. So it, like, they all can morph into certain things. Anyway, in the end, I'll just publish the damn thing. But the point is that they can shapeshift and bounce off of each other.
Right.
So your job then is to get clear about what your pattern is. So if it's get this idea, start to do due diligence, go down the spiral of comparison to see what else is in there in the name of due diligence, then start to lose the plot point of what you wanted to say because it's all been said before, which is line number 4 of the imposter complex, and then start to, you get some peer review, but you don't like what they have to say. So you know, like, whatever your pattern is, it's up to you to identify that. So in each step, we can do a micro adjustment at every single point. So in terms, like, if you're getting feedback from somebody, how rhetorically sound will their feedback be? Do they know more about you in this topic? I mean, these are very simple questions, but this is how we start to unravel what our natural patterns are that have been so deeply grooved.
Yeah.
Because they're, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that's excellent, because one thing about all these behaviors that you're talking about, we're focusing on perfectionism and procrastination, but all of the things you're saying we can do this with, which is to bring them to light, to start to track them, which automatically means we have to slow down our engagement with them. We're not just automatically leaping into our gear that we're habituated to, slowing them down, saying, okay, what is happening right now? I've just gone and I just cleaned out the closet in this hour when I was going to write some scenes in my book, but now my closet is all over the floor. And what just happened there? Like, let's just pause for a second, because I think that it's easy to come back and say, well, I'm just bad. That's terrible. And I have to do better. And oh my God, I have a deadline. I'm going to miss it. Or I'm never going to have a book contract because I just keep doing this kind of thing. So what I hear you saying is that there's some space in there to work with what we see coming up in order to track it, map it, look at it, make it something that exists rather than a driver that just pushes us in one direction or another. And in that way, we can come to know it better and incorporate it better. Because maybe there is a day when cleaning the closet also coincides with working out a narrative problem. And that's how it happens, is in that moment.
Totally. And so that's, you're nailed it, because we want to make ourselves wrong right across the board, but there might be a very helpful aspect to the process. And we're integrating, we're working something out. Doing that due diligence is actually kind of important, but if you recognize that only you know when that tips over into that tricky spot. So, you can start assigning values to certain things. So of course, I'm always going to want to take, a break during the middle of the day, and I'm going to want to do this kind of thing, but I'm going to limit it. I'm going to limit my amount of time. Or say, you want to assign some time to do some research. Well, only you, again, can really judge how much time is appropriate for that particular task. So if I want to research something for a blog post, I'm going to give that about as much time as I would give, say, a client call, about an hour. Unless it's an area of expertise or an area of functional understanding that is out of my league, then I might give myself a whole day. But only I will know what that right amount of time is, and then I can be more realistic about that. But we do have to sit back, to your point, and recognize what those natural set points are. And this is a pattern you've been living your whole life. It's not just with your book. It's with everything that you've ever done that has been very important to you. It's been on big decisions. It's been it's been everywhere. Everything that's important to you, this has been a pattern that you have been able to replicate again and again and again. Mm-hmm. So you get to rewrite it. Mm-hmm. And that can be a really fun process, and it takes time. But either way, if you go down, usually, what will happen if you get to the end of whatever that, inspiration to depletion or inspiration to, turfing the whole thing, I don't know what that is. There are 10 different places where you can make different choices, and you get to decide what those are.
Awesome. That's so interesting. I really love this idea that I just wrote it down, that self-doubt is proof of your humanity. That seems to me that it speaks to, you don't think you've got it all together. You're questioning whether what you're doing is the right thing to do for you, it's the right thing to do for others. There's something, you want it, you're checking your context, yourself. Is that how you mean it? Because that seems so empowering. I want to make sure I understand that.
So really, when to the original point, if you decide that you're going to create the new project, and all of a sudden you're just absolutely overwhelmed with the sense of, I can't do it, which will look like different things for other people. But again, Imposter Complex wants to keep you out of action, down to your capacity, and alone and isolated. We're going to pile on all the reasons that we can't do it. And all of those reasons will become, more data points for all the reasons we can't. And if we have this other belief that if I was confident, then I would be able to do it, but I'm not confident, I won't be able to do it. That's definitely a self-fulfilling prophecy. So once we just dial that back and recognize, you've never done it before, and that's why it's scary. That's why it's new. So let's go back to all that you have done, all the times that you have been at this place before you jumped on the precipice of your expansion, and recognize that the party was on the other side of the resistance. Let's remember all of those times, because you've been here before, and it's just a quite simply a part of your humanity. That's just the idea that you want to do this well. It's important to you. You are excellent. You've got people that are paying attention to what you're doing. You want to be of service to them. You want it to be useful, helpful, all of the things that you want it to be. It matters. So that's why you're feeling what you're feeling, not because you can't do it, but because you want to do it. And it's just simply baked into your humanity.
And it's so meaningful for you. That is also so key, that it brings up the doubt, because it's so meaningful for you. Yeah. I love that. That's such a positive spin on something that can seem like such a trap. I think that, and also what is implicit in what you're saying is that these are moments of growth, where we're jumping out of how we used to be, or the idea like, one day I would like to write a book, into a moment of, now I am writing a book. So you've taken that leap. You're challenging your limits, you're challenging your self-conception, you're putting, rubber to the road. Now, like, am I a writer or not? Am I doing this or not? And so, now you're a bit flying without a net.
Yeah. Yes.
So of course these doubts are going to come up.
Yeah. So your identity is completely shifted. Your identity is completely shifting. In my TEDx talk, I talk about, Gabrielle Roth says, after we jump and before we land is God. And I just like that. When I think about that, it makes that stress so much. Of course I've fallen on my face before. Of course I have. And I've also soared. And either way, there was growth, there was learning. And it's a thing that I want to do. I've not been pushed off anything. I've jumped. I've chosen to jump. I've chosen this more.
Right. So that choosing to is very important to remember, because that's where the power is. You're choosing to do something new and scary and fun also. And in that, there can be some wobbly days, wobbly moments.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to ask you, how can people find you if they want to know more about the Imposter Complex, or your leadership coaching, or the programs you're offering? Where should they go to find you?
TanyaGeisler.com is where you'll find all the things that I'm up to. And if you're more socially inclined, I'm at Tanya Geisler on Instagram, and Tanya Geisler Coaching on Facebook. And I have a Facebook group as well called Overcoming the Imposter Complex that you can find.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Tanya Geisler. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Joel.
Everyone, I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.